Good evening, everyone. Welcome here. Thanks for being here for another inner hour. I appreciate it. And let me see here. I want to make one more adjustment. Okay, there we go. So, welcome. As always, I like to take a moment before I start. I'm going to light a little candle. It gives me a chance to sort of focus on being present and let go of the day. So, if you haven't done that for yourself, please do that whatever way you like. So there's my little candle. Alrighty. Pardon me. We're continuing our series tonight on the what I call the Great Souls, and we're up to Zoroaster. So we probably get through him tonight, but we might not because there's a lot associated with Zoroaster, and he's not one of those people that too many are familiar with. So, and he has a huge influence on Christianity and Judaism. So I want to talk about that connection tonight. So Zoroaster was his Greek name. So if you look him up, in history or Google or something, under Zoroaster, you'll find his information. His Persian name, that's where he lived, was Zarathustra. And for those of you familiar with philosophy, world philosophy in general, there's a German philosopher named Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote a book about Zarathustra. I don't remember the title, but anyway, uh, so I'm going to kind of give you a summary of his overall teachings and then go into the particulars of how a significant amount of what he taught ended up in Judaism, and then some of that on into Christianity. So if you have questions or comments at any time, please feel free to, turn on your camera or raise a hand or whatever. But if not, then I'll specifically open it up to everyone after we get through this kind of intro section. So, Zarathustra, kind of summary, again, taught monotheism, that there was one creator and only one creator. Now, if you study later writings about Zarathustra, you will find that um, he's often represented as being dualistic, and that he had a good God and a bad God kind of a thing, and that they were in competition. That's actually really not true. That's a later understanding of what he taught. He did teach one supreme God, whom he called, again, these are Persian language, I think Farsi, but anyway, Ahura Mazda. So that was the one supreme God who basically we experienced as light of awareness or light of consciousness. And because of that association with light, the sun and fire, both. They obviously didn't have electricity back in those days. So their sources of light were the sun and otherwise, when the sun wasn't available, fire. Those are the two sources of light. So both of those things are very important in their religious worships and their various festivals and liturgies and so forth as symbols of this light of awareness or the light of the one. Now, there is a dualistic aspect to his teachings, but he didn't teach that they were equal or in competition. He did teach that the planet, our world, um, was dualistic and that there was a constant um, battle between or struggle for the balance of good and evil. And he did teach about good and evil in our world. Um, the bad guy that later in the Western Judeo-Christian traditions was called Satan or the Satan, Hasatan, meaning the adversary, sometimes called by the Latin name Lucifer, um, meaning light bearer, actually, oddly enough, but that's another story. But anyway, in the Zoroastrian or Zarathustrian teachings of Persia, It was Angra Mainyu, or Mainyu, sometimes pronounced. And that in this struggle for dominance in this world between the forces of good and evil, mankind played a critical role because as agents of free will or free choice, mankind could choose good or evil. So the balance of what happened to the planet and its history was really decided by human beings and whether they adhered to the good aspect or the dark aspect, the light or dark aspect, the good or evil aspect. So he very much did teach of a struggle, but he also taught that there was a supreme realm where Ahura Mazda reigned, and it was all a realm of light and what we would maybe call goodness or peace, or all the attributes that we like in the we would think of as uh, supreme or heavenly or divine. He also taught, pardon me, because human beings have free choice, that they have a moral responsibility on how they use their choice. And that a person's moral, how well they handle their moral responsibility would determine their fate, their direction in life, and their fate, not only in this life, but in the afterlife, because he did teach and believe in an afterlife. And so whether you were a proponent of good or evil in this life determined the quality of your life now, and it also determined the quality of your afterlife. Um, so, all right. The There was how different religions have kind of creeds or sayings that become associated with them. Well, one of the central mottos or one of the central sayings, often attributed to Zarathustra, certainly later attributed to his followers, is good thoughts, good words, good deeds, which kind of covers human behavior, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And I know some of us think if we think good thoughts, it doesn't matter much what we say, but it really does. Or if we do pretty much good deeds, but then what we think is none of anybody else's business is kind of our business, and we can think whatever kind of awful things we want. Zarathustra's teachings was you need to focus on goodness in your thoughts and in your speech and in your deeds. So as far as the afterlife, I'll get into this in more detail when I talk about the parts that affected Judaism and then Christianity. But essentially, you can already see a parallel between Moses and the one creator and Akhenaten and the one supreme god of light, the sun god, Atan. So we have this similarity again. And again, we're not sure when Zarathustra lived exactly, wide range of opinions with scholars and historians. So whether he influenced them or vice versa uh, is uncertain, but the influence on Jewish thought after the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BC is unquestionable from Zarathustra, tremendous influence on Judaism from that point on. So after death, he taught that every individual soul went through a judgment after death, and they had to cross a bridge. In their language, it was called Shinvat, and it was the bridge from this world into the afterlife. Similar to the concepts of what now New Agey people call the Rainbow Bridge, similar to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where you have to cross over and your soul is weighed by the goddess Ma'at. And if the weight of your soul is heavier than a feather, you have to come back. You can't move on to the supreme world. And if it's light, then you're free of this world and you can move on. So some similarities there, and that the righteous always safely cross into the heavenly realm after their death. They don't have any worries of torment or hell or a difficult rebirth afterlife. If they're righteous, good people, regardless of whether they're Zarathustrians or not, righteous, good people always arrive safely at the heavenly realm after their death. Whereas those who are really wicked of heart always are punished. Now, the exact nature of that punishment is a little unclear in some of the writings. Once again, partly because it was so long ago, we have very few of the original writings. We have oral legends mostly. They got written down much later, which is true of almost all the great teachers, at least great teachers who had religions develop around their teachings. He also taught that there would be an end time, not just an individual judgment when the person died, but that there would be an end time at which humanity would be judged. And I probably cannot pronounce this correctly because it is Farsi. I'll make a stab at it though. I believe it's Fresh Okereti. That could be totally wrong. But that's a word that described his teachings of the end time. And during that end time, there were a couple of key components, which we'll get to in more depth in a few minutes. That number one, evil would be destroyed and not afflict humanity anymore. That all of the dead, not just the good, all of the dead would be resurrected and at that point face a final judgment. That is also now a traditional Christian teaching, which came long after Zarathustra. So that certainly influenced Christian theology. And that the world after that point, there would still be a world and there would still be humanity, but it'd be a new world and a new humanity. Also a Christian theme, largely in the book of Revelation, but hinted at elsewhere in the New Testament. And that in this new world, humanity would be restored to its kind of original pristine state or innocent state. And it would be a world with goodness and light, but no evil and no darkness, spiritual darkness. That would be gone. Zarathustra also taught that purity and respect were important, and that people needed to respect the planet and the sacred elements of the planet, which were four in his day: um, air or wind, earth, fire, and water, the typical kind of four elements. And that those were the primary building blocks of the physical world, and that all of those should be respected, and that humanity had an obligation to care for and respect nature and the natural balance, which a lot of ecological movements try to do today. Whether they succeed and help or hurt is a matter of opinion, but that's kind of the goal at least. And and many indigenous ancient cultures had that living real rapport with nature because they lived in nature as opposed to kind of in artificial worlds and constructs as we do these days, and had a tremendous respect for nature. So anyway, that's those are kind of that's kind of my overview of many of the key points of his teachings. So I'll pause there for a moment in case anybody has any questions up to that point or comments. And after that, we'll get into specific things that affected what became Jewish teachings. So any input so far? By the way, my lovely wife is on a computer right now that doesn't have a microphone connected to it or camera. So while she can hear and see us, we cannot hear and see her. So if Ani has anything she wants to share, she's gonna have to zip in here for a minute. I'm
You've
really saying
effectively you've
saying
effectively muted your wife,
yeah,
Stephen.
yeah, how about that?
This is Liz.
I'm gonna have to teach a couples class or a men's
Oh
group class with Ani.
no,
Right.
that's terrible. Poor Annie. She has so much good stuff to teach us and share.
Oh, that's for
Um,
sure. Yeah, well, she can zip in here. This is actually kind of convenient for her because she's comfy in the office and it doesn't have those right at the moment. But anyway, go ahead,
so
Liz.
let's make sure she's comfy. Um, I just wanted to say thank you for teaching us about this because I find it very interesting. That's all I wanted to
Oh,
say. So
well,
thank
thank
you.
you. Yeah, you're
Yep,
welcome. Thanks, Liz. Appreciate the feedback.
you're welcome.
All
Oop.
righty. So moving on, the again Zarathustra. You're probably familiar with, but in case you aren't, Jews have been exiled from their homeland multiple times in their history. I don't know if this is really true or not, but I mean, I haven't looked at this, but my sense of it is they probably spent more time in exile than they have in their homeland. But certainly they've been exiled a lot under lots of different regimes and lots of other faiths and lots of other political rulers. And at times they were widely accepted in certain places, particularly like the 1200, 1300s in Western Europe. Um, for a long time, there was a lot of rapport between particularly the mystical components of Judaism and mystical Christians and mystical Sufis or mystical Islamists, Muslims who are called Sufis. So, but one of the major and longest captivities and exiles, both captivity and exile, because they were defeated and then captured and put into slavery in Babylon in the 6th century BC. So during that era, Zarathustra was positively before then, way before then. Whichever historical dates are correct, nobody thinks he was that late. So he already had his traditions had a large following throughout Persia and the Babylonian Empire during the 6th century. So Jews would have had a very long time of being exposed to Zarathustrian ideas, which after the Babylonian exile ended and they went back to the Holy Land and back to Jerusalem and so on, that's a whole other story. Maybe sometime we'll do that story. It's a fascinating history. Uh, I think it's fascinating history. And one aside that I find absolutely remarkable, and you might not, but I find it truly remarkable. Um, Percentage-wise of the population of the earth, the race of Jews, and it is a race as well as a faith, is statistically incredibly small and always has been incredibly small. As a faith, as a group of believers in Judaism, it is also small and has always been small compared to other world religions and traditions. And Jews, in the course of their history, have been targeted by some of the biggest and most powerful regimes in world history, many of whom tried to eliminate them, or at least eliminate their faith and their practices of their faith, including the Romans at one point, certainly including the Nazis, um, and a number of others, Assyrians, Babylonians, and all of these great, powerful world empires that tried to vanquish the Jews and either eradicate them or eradicate their faith, all of those empires are gone and the Jews are still here. That's historically, I think, unique. It's certainly impressive to me. But anyway, moving on. So here's some of the teachings that became Jewish teaching. There was not Jewish teaching prior to the 6th century captivity in Babylon. So, number one is bodily resurrection of the dead, that the dead would face a final judgment, and that would determine their ultimate fate, whether they went to paradise and a kind of a heavenly blissful state, or whether they went to torment. He didn't use the word hell, but it would correspond to later concepts of hell. And Daniel, actually, I'm pretty sure this is right. Again, some historian might be able to correct me, but generally speaking, this is accurate. The prophet Daniel was the very first Jewish prophet to actually specifically talk about bodily resurrection of the dead. And yes, I know about Elijah and the dead bones and reanimating them, but his teaching wasn't about everybody being resurrected after their death. That was raising up an army to protect the Jews. And in Daniel's teaching, there is not only a resurrection, but there is a final judgment, and then there's a reward of punishment or I don't know what the opposite of that be, a wonderful reward or a terrible punishment afterwards. Daniel also, in case we've don't know or forgotten this, was a personal advisor to King Darius. So Daniel, would have been also very familiar with Zarathustrian teachings in Persia at the time. And that idea of this final resurrection and then a final reward or a final punishment, Christians really latched onto much, much later, after Jesus, really, but during that era, and took that as a major Christian doctrine, which it still is now. And I want to point out something that I think is honestly insignificant, but I just find it interesting. I don't think this is a causal relationship at all. I think it's more of just an interesting coincidence. But if you look at the primary Jewish sect that developed into what is now rabbinical Judaism and now modern day Judaism, the word for that sect in the days of Jesus was Pharisee, sometimes written or pronounced as Farsi. And Farsi is the language of ancient Persia that Zarathustra spoke. I just think that's an interesting coincidence. The name Pharisee did not come from that, but it's still an interesting thing, I think. Here's another one that you'll find familiar, I believe. Zarathustra predicted that there was an imminent coming of something he called Saoshant. And basically that translates as world savior. So it's a concept that God was going to send this savior, and this savior would join in with humans and help them rise up in the battle against evil and would lead the final battle and the final and ultimate defeat of evil, led by this world savior whom God would send. And moreover, this world savior would be born of a virgin. So that sounds familiar, right? At least to Christians, traditional Christians. That's the idea of what Jesus was supposed to have been. A savior sent by God, divinely sent by God, born of a virgin, whose goal was to save mankind and ultimately defeat evil. So this idea existed way before Christianity and way before Jesus was ever born, and goes way back to either 1000 or 1700-ish BC, to the teachings of Zarathustra, which is the first historical writings about that theme that I'm aware of. Okay. He also, Zarathustra, also had a practice. They had a number of religious practices, sacred fires that they built at certain holy times of the year. And people, again, later philosophers thought they worshiped fire. They didn't worship fire. It was a symbol of the light, when the light of pure being, or the light of spiritual light, the light of the one Ahura Mazda, the one creator. But in addition to that ritual, they had another ritual. And this ritual was at a certain time of year, they would mark their foreheads with ash. Does that sound familiar to anybody raised in a church? Christians still have this was not a Jesus practice, by the way, just to be clear. Jews did have a practice involving ash, but not the way Christians do it, and not at that time of year. But Christians have something called Ash Wednesday now. And they actually put ashes, those who are observant, on their heads. This was a Zarathustrian practice at that time of year. And they were to do that as a symbol of repentance and contrition before a ritual of forgiveness and atonement. So does any of that sound familiar? So that's from Zarathustra. Part of the ritual of putting ash on their foreheads and the forgiveness of sins was that they had to go through confession of sins, a formal confession of sins to a Zarathustrian priest. And those of you who are Catholic or familiar with Catholicism, that should sound familiar. It was privately done between the person and the priest, where they confessed their sins, much as Catholics confess in private to a Catholic priest. Zarathustra also started what would now be looked at as a Eucharistic ritual. And this was not before the Jewish practice of blessing over bread and wine. That goes way back to the book of Genesis and Melchizedek, actually pre-Moses, to the time of Melchizedek and Abraham. And then Moses had kept that and adopted it. And then this blessing over bread and wine was part of almost every Jewish holiday, almost, certainly every Jewish meal. And that got adopted into Christianity. And then the Jewish Passover meal specifically, which had specific blessings, also involving bread and wine, were then adopted into Christianity as the Eucharist, because actually of a, no offense, but of a mistranslation of what Jesus said at the Last Supper versus the earliest translations of that we have of what he said at the Last Supper, which was not about bread or wine being turned into his actual blood and body. He did not say that. But in any case, but he did do the Passover ritual, and he did want people to continue that ritual. So Zarathustra had a ritual very similar to what Christians now consider Eucharist, and very similar to the Jewish blessing at meals over the bread and wine. It was called the Haoma ritual in Farsi, and there was a sacrifice involved, but not a blood sacrifice, because he was completely opposed to blood sacrifices. And it was a plant sacrifice. She brought certain plants to be sacrificed in the altar of fire for this confession of sins, putting on the ash from that fire, and then asking for forgiveness. The other piece that affects Judaism and Christianity is that the followers of Zarathustra, sometimes were called Zarathustrians, but their actual title back then, the priests of Zarathustra, were called Magi. So that should be a term familiar to Christians again, because while it now says, well, the traditional Christianity, pretty much, I think this is a fair statement, most denominations pretty much teach that as part of the birth story, which is primarily in the second chapter of Luke, as part of the birth story around Jesus, is that in addition to the shepherds in the field and so on, that that three wise men came from the east bearing gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, to the baby Jesus in the stable. Now, actually, the New Testament in any version does not say anywhere ever that there were three wise men. It does not say that. It doesn't say how many there were. It's a plural form, plural noun, plural masculine noun. So clearly there were more than two. So there could have been three. And since there were three gifts, the assumption has been for centuries that one gift per wise person. So there were three gifts, three wise men. There could have been three gifts and two wise men, or there could have been, one wise man could have bought gold and myrrh, and another one nothing, and another one, the frankincense. Or there could have been four wise men or half a dozen wise men, all of whom brought some variation of those three gifts. It just doesn't say. So the oral tradition, the legend is three wise men, three gifts, but the text never has said that and doesn't say that. It just says wise men. From the East is how our English Bibles typically translate it. The early manuscripts are more specific and say that three magi from Persia came. So that would now, to us, not mean much difference. We think, oh, the magi were wise men. No, the magi were Zoroastrian priests or Zarathustrian priests. So it was a very specific thing. It was a group of people who were priests in the Zarathustrian line coming to quite probably somebody they believed might be this world savior that their teacher centuries ago had predicted. And Zarathustra had also predicted something else that I neglected to mention, that the Magi would be able to know when that world savior was coming by the appearance of a particular star in the sky. Does that sound familiar? And that's why they came to find this child. Now, what the Bible also does not say, but Christian tradition assumes, is that they showed up at the stable. If you read the biblical text, even in the Gospel of Luke, it does not say that. In fact, it says something that kind of prohibits that. It says that they arrived at the house where the young child was, not the stable with the baby. So they weren't at the birth. If the star heralded the birth and they saw that as far away as parts of Persia and then traveled by camel or other caravan means to get to Jerusalem, they didn't fly there on United and get there the next day. It took a while. It probably took at least a year, maybe two, to make that journey. So Jesus was probably a year or two old when they arrived. Plus, when they arrived, they warned Joseph and Mary that Jesus was going to be in great danger from a purge and persecution that Herod was going to start, and to take him and to protect him from that purge. And then Herod does do that. The slaughter of the innocents is now called. And the edict was that all male children, because Herod did not want a Jewish Messiah of the line of David, that was the kingly line, to be born, who would have rightful claim to the throne that Herod sat on without rightful claim to it. The Romans put him in. He did not have claim to that throne. So Herod was afraid of that. So he wanted to kill all those babies so nobody could grow up to be the king of Israel. And the edict was not babies. The edict was all male children 2 years and under. So if Herod thought he was a newborn, he could have said 6 months and under. But he specified 2 years because Jesus was probably about 2 years old at that time. And that time frame would have encompassed the age he could have been. So the Magi went to see him at the house where they were living at the time, not the thing. The other thing, not the stable. The other thing is that, how do I want to put this? Another part of the Christmas story that you probably know is that in Roman tradition now, the birth of Mithras, who was one of the gods, was very important and celebrated with a winter solstice festival on December 25th. The solstice isn't then, but the festival, the winter solstice festival was, and as part of that, they celebrated the birth of Mithras, was December 25th in our calendar. No historian believes that Jesus was born on December 25th. Everybody knows that's not so, based on the other clues in the text as the time of year and what was growing and where the shepherds were. Didn't happen then. But Christianity adopted it because they were trying to say, look, this is God being born here. We have the real God, not this Mithras guy. And we're going to celebrate his birth, the real God's birth, on that day, because it's going to make it easier for all these Roman pagans to switch over to that and go, oh, it really isn't Mithras, it's this Jesus guy. So that was just a cultural appropriation. How's that for a modern term for an ancient thing? Of adopting that into Christianity in hopes of better acceptance among the Roman and Greek as well world. Now, one other thing you may not know is that there's a famous story in the New Testament about the temptation of Jesus prior to him starting his ministry. He goes into the wilderness right after his baptism by John, and according to the Bible, New Testament, he is tempted by Satan in the wilderness for 40 days. Long story, several temptations. In essence, the temptations are, don't worship God, worship me, Satan. And if you do that, all these things will be yours. All the things you want will be yours. You'll have all these powers. You'll get what you want. Just worship me and deny God, which Jesus, of course, refused to do. Guess what? Way before he was born, before the Babylonian captivity, way before that, Zarathustra taught, well, I shouldn't say that. The legend of Zarathustra says that Zarathustra was taken by the demon Ahriman, who corresponds to Satan in Judaism and Christianity, that Ahriman, who is the principal demon, took Zoroaster into the wilderness for 40 days and tempted him with all kinds of worldly power if he would just deny Ahura Mazda and worship him, the demon Ahriman. And Zarathustra refused. So that story way predates Jesus, a long, long time before Jesus, and was adopted into Jewish teachings and then was adopted into Christian teachings. Or they independently came up with the same idea. But certainly it's the same story. So the last piece of Zoroaster and how it affects Jewish and Christian teaching, particularly Christian nowadays, is that Zarathustra taught that when a human being died, the soul of that human being was aware of the body that they had left and aware of the family that they were leaving, and they hung around connected to the body and the family for 3 days. And during that 3 days, they got to make kind of have closure with that life. They also went through a personal review of their life, judging whether they accomplished what they wanted to or didn't, whether they felt like they fulfilled what they intended when they came in or didn't. And all of those answers to themselves ended up with what happened to them afterwards. But that was a 3 day period where all that took place. And therefore, the body should not be disturbed during that period of time. And so burials were done after that period of time when the soul was no longer connected to that body at all in terms of hanging around. Many other traditions adopted that around the world, not just Jews and Christians. And then some have exactly the opposite. They want to get rid of the body as fast as possible. They burn it or bury it like right away. But that became something Christianity latched onto. And so the 3 days with Jesus in the tomb, which no matter how you count it, wasn't 3 days. If he was buried Friday afternoon, and then there's Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon, that's 2 days, let alone Sunday morning. It's like a day and a half. But anyway, the 3 day idea in Christianity and modern Western culture, much of it about burying 3 days later, is probably or might have its origin in that story. So those are some of the key main theological ideas of Zarathustra and some of the points that I think radically influenced Jewish teaching because of their constant exposure to this for a very long time in the 6th century in BC in Babylon. And you can see it in Judaism becoming a mainstream teaching in Judaism after that point in time. And then Christianity sort of being influenced by that and adopting some of it and alternating some of it, but in some form carrying on a lot of that. So, okay, time for me to be quiet again. So please, any ideas, questions, comments, things you'd like to share with the group? Just you're welcome to do that.
This is Liz.
Hi, Liz.
I have nothing of depth to say other than I've heard you teach these things before, and I love hearing it again. That's all.
Oh, good.
I just
Oh, good. Yeah.
do it. So.
Yeah, we did a thing on Zoroaster a long time ago. So yeah, but there's it's there's so much in the Bible, both the Jewish Bible and particularly the New Testament, that people who've been raised exclusively in kind of narrow traditional parameters of both Judaism and more especially Christianity just don't know. There's just things that are widely known. They're not secrets, but they just haven't been exposed to it and they just don't know it. And personally, I think it's very informative to have some of that background and context and relationships. I just find that helpful, but not some people don't like it. So anyway, Nahama, Nahama and Shuli. Oh, and Bob, it says.
Hi, Uncle Stephen.
Hi,
It
how are you, Shuli?
okay. I before I go, I do have to give Auntie and Lance their Tallahassee weather report because I know
Oh, good.
Auntie will both whimper and go yay. Well, and Lance will be happy. It's in the mid to upper 80s right now. So there's Auntie going whimpering, but
Yes, if she had a microphone that worked, you could probably hear her, but hers doesn't. So
She'll give me, I guess you can give her a smart aleck comment back.
okay.
But anyways, though she will love that we had quite finally about half an inch of rain yesterday, which is sorely needed.
Oh, good. Good.
One clap of thunder
Without one clap of thunder or with one clap of thunder?
with one
Oh, with.
clap.
Okay. Well, at least there's only one.
Yes, but the timing was weird because we were at services.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but we were fine. No getting
That was
hard
God
on rain.
talking.
Okay. Okay. Good.
But the timing actually worked out fine because we ended up not getting soaking wet, which was good. Um, okay, I just two things. One, um, all the main religions, they all interconnect with each other. There's a bit of
Mhm.
everything in all of them that all
Abs-
connect.
Absolutely.
So that's one. And the other, just a quick reminder, in Judaism, we do not read the book of Daniel because we do not read the Apocrypha. And book of Daniel, if I
Right.
remember correctly, is in the Apocrypha.
You do remember correctly. Absolutely. Yep.
With, the hence we don't do Maccabees because it's also part.
Yes.
Funnily enough, it's Hanukkah
Yes.
because Maccabees 1 is the Hanukkah story, if I remember correct. I always mix up 1 and 2, but I think it's the
I think
first
it's one. I think it is one. Yeah.
Um, but we don't read it.
Yes.
So,
Right. Good point.
reminder
Good
us.
point. Yes. Thank you for bringing that out. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. So what Shuli said about all world religions having something of each other in them, they really do. And one of the challenges for me that I think does have social and political consequences is that fundamentalists, not all people of every faith, but the fundamentalists of all faiths, fundamentalists in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, in Hinduism, in a number of other traditions, um, they have a tendency to think my my tradition is right and everybody else's is wrong. And they have this idea that what what their tradition believes is unique. And as Shuli just pointed out, you'd be really hard pressed to find anything unique in any religion that didn't appear in some other religion in some form. They're just they're just not that unique. So Jesus was born of a virgin. Well, guess what? So is Buddha. So is Apollo of Apollonius of Tyana. So are a number of other figures. Now, Christians say, well, yeah, well, we don't believe that. Well, okay, but the story is they were. You believe Jesus was, you believe they weren't, but the story is they were, and many others were too. Pythagoras was born of a virgin, and so on, according to the stories. But they think it's unique to Jesus. It wasn't unique to Jesus. They think being crucified was unique to Jesus. That he and these two guys crucified next to him, that was it. That was the entire crucifixion that Rome did. No, there were thousands and thousands of Jews crucified under the Roman Empire. It was almost a daily occurrence at certain periods in time. And and again, they think it was unique to him. It wasn't unique to him. They think that things like love the Lord, I mean, really literally, and I'm not accusing all Christians of this, but fundamentalists who aren't well educated, I know a number of them who think Jesus saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself was unique to him, that he came up with that. He's quoting Moses there, and they don't know that. I mean, it's not a secret. None of these things are secrets. And I'm not trying to pick on Christian fundamentalists. What I'm saying is that it's kind of difficult to deal with fundamentalists in any tradition because they're so rigid and so limited in what they're willing to look at or accept. And sometimes that rigidity and fervor translates into hostility toward or even violence toward people who don't believe what they believe or believe something quite different. And that's one of the problems that fundamentalism worldwide has and continues, in my opinion, to cause. Whereas people who are more, I'm not saying that they should have no standards or they should just accept whatever anybody says. I don't mean that at all. But people who are willing to be more educated about their own faith tend to have a more open mind, and they may not change their faith, but they're it gives them some compassion and understanding for people of different faiths that allow them to at least behave compassionately toward them. And and so I think that radicalism, maybe that's even a better term than fundamentalism, but fundamentalism so often leads to radicalism. Radicalism is by the people who practice it, they think of as a very noble thing because they think they're so dedicated and so devoted to whatever that cause is. And in reality, radicalism is almost always really destructive. So I'm going to quit again. Anybody else? I was getting my little personal spiel in there. Anybody else comments or questions about any of this from tonight? Yeah, Ted or Eunice or both.
Trying. Okay.
Hey, gotcha.
It's Eunice.
Hey, Eunice.
Am I getting through?
Yep.
What I find myself thinking as you talk about Zoroastrianism, boy, that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know.
And you're looking at that as the root and the origins for many of these teachings and thoughts that go through Judaism and Christianity and even to the East, with more about reincarnation and they have their huge festival of lights and so on.
Yeah, Diwali, yeah.
Then I look at it and go, well, where did Zarathustra get it from?
Good question.
That's
a great question.
Did great revelations come before this person? Because it doesn't work that way anywhere else.
Right.
So it's just one of these, sort of philosophical looking at things and examining them.
Yeah.
Okay. Where is the beginning?
Where is the beginning? Exactly. It's a kind of a perennial question for all of us about everything. One of my favorite answers to that is an old Jewish story. In the late 1700s AD in Eastern Europe, there was a teacher I've talked about before named whose title was the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name. And at the time in the area he lived, he was getting a tremendous popularity among particularly the poor and lesser educated populace. And there was a very well-educated, very strict Jew whose title was the Vilna of Gaon. And he did not think kindly of the Baal Shem Tov and thought he was a fraud and misleading people and all of that. And so he took an oppositional position to him. And he was very upset that that the Baal Shem Tov had a much larger following and it kept growing. And so he decided he would prove to everybody that he really wasn't the master people thought he was. So he wrote out a series of questions, and he gave one of his own students, the Vilna, gave one of his own students this series of questions and said, take these to the Baal Shem and have him write out the answers for me and bring them back to me. Because I have questions about what the Torah says and things that people have never understood about Torah, and I have the answers. And my group of other scholarly associates, we know these answers. He's this uneducated peasant. He will not know these answers. So he will not be able to answer my questions, and that will demonstrate to people that he's not really a master and he's a fraud. So he does that, and he takes the questions to him, and the Baal Shem Tov understands he's being tested and understands what it is. And he consents anyway. He consents to write out these questions. So he writes out the questions to these really difficult theological and philosophical questions from Torah and sends them back to the Vilna, who reads them and is astonished because they're all right and they're exactly how the Vilna would have answered them. So he's kind of dumbfounded and really taken aback. So I don't remember exactly if he meets, I believe he goes and meets with the Baal Shem. It might have been another emissary thing. I don't remember that part. But in anywhere, there's another exchange. And he basically says to the Baal Shem, okay, these are right. How did you do that? Where did you get this? How did you do it? I know you're not educated and stuff. I know you don't have access to all the scrolls and the books that I do. How did you possibly come up with this? Where did you get this? And he was thinking the Baal Shem was going to say that he had some scholar who helped him, or he had a secret stash of scrolls or some such thing. And what he said to the Vilna was, I got this information from the same source that Moses and the prophets did. That was his answer. He didn't get it from Moses or from the prophets or from any writings. He got it from the source that Moses himself and the prophets themselves got it from. He
which
was
is the nature of movement.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think I love that story. So,
Because, you know, when we've compared personal
you and
stories
I,
of
yeah,
mystical experiences,
yeah,
uh, you know, we've got the same stories
mhm, mhm,
and, you know, the same kind of revelations
yeah,
that, you know, and we didn't discuss it with each other or
no,
have anything that was set up to, um,
no,
you know, make us think in those, you know, hey, some of these things come like, is what?
I know, I know.
You know, not something that comes that, you know, I wouldn't have thought that at all. I wouldn't have come up with that.
Oh, I know, I know. Every now and then in the work that I do, I come across somebody who is kind of quiet and they come to some programs or whatever. And at some point, they either email me or they talk to me privately. And it doesn't happen all the time, but I've had this happen numerous times where they'll come to me and they'll share some experience that they've had that they're really reluctant to share because it seems to them so out there and so unusual. And they've maybe tried to talk to somebody else about it in the past and it didn't go well, trying to share that. It's like people thought they were crazy or had no clue what they were talking about. And they'll start talking to me about it and go, oh yeah. And then I'll kind of describe my experience with that same thing. And they'll be just stunned. It's like somebody else has had this experience. And it's a very kind of relief almost in a way to find out that somebody else has had some of these experiences. And
and somebody that you don't think is crazy.
yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. So
Experiences.
so I think I know there are teachers out there who do not encourage students and people to share inner experiences with each other. I get that that's to try to avoid the one-upmanship and the ego comparison and oh, you think you had a great experience, look at this experience, that which people sometimes do. But I think my overall my attitude toward that is people need to be sharing their experiences because it helps them understand we're all connected to that same source and it helps them to not feel so alone or weird or crazy or isolated. So I think finding a person or a small group of people where you can share personal things is really helpful.
But the problem is, and um, maybe this isn't okay. I'm going to go with it. It becomes the pearls before swine story.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
You know, where you tell somebody you share something this very,
Hmm.
you know, that's a, you know, a very intimate thing for
Hmm.
you,
Hmm.
and you know, intimate and important, and they trash it.
Right. Which I do think is what Jesus was talking about in that example you referenced. Yeah. And so it's not, I mean, it's not, it takes it takes some trial and error and it takes some discernment, certainly, because there are a number of people who, there are many people that I absolutely would not share some of my more inner spiritual experiences with. I just wouldn't do it. And there are some that I would, and I would not expect them to fully understand some of the experiences. And thank God there's some that I know who either will understand the experience from their own experiences, or at least they'll be very they'll honor it and be very receptive to it and treat it as the kind of intimate thing it is, even if it may not be an experience they've had. So yeah, but that one of the dangers among mystics, I shouldn't say danger, one of the pitfalls of having kind of a mystical orientation. The advantage is, of course, you can see truth in all kinds of places where other people can't. But one of the disadvantages is it can feel very isolating sometimes because it's, again, the bulk of humanity and probably the bulk of people most of us are around, unless we really are actively involved in a community with that orientation, um, just aren't interested, don't have those experiences, um, wouldn't understand them, or would, as you say, kind of, I don't remember the word used, but basically, mock them or devalue them. And
Mostly
so,
treat it with, well, I did have one person call it BS,
yeah, yeah,
and I was only, and I wasn't even going into anything with depth with that person.
hmm hmm yeah,
I have to say that I do kind of test the waters,
yeah, me too, me too.
and um, those, those times, like I said, even if they don't understand it, if you just treat it with respect,
Right,
that's,
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I've been through times when people I really thought, or a group, whatever,
hmm
was safe.
hmm
It was not.
hmm Yeah.
Really, that's been pretty rare to find
hmm
safe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate the what you're sharing. It's important. It's an important thing. Just right before we close, if anybody else has anything didn't get a chance to, we'll do that, and then we'll wrap up for tonight. Oh, Liz, go ahead.
Hey, Stephen. I just wanted to share as quickly as I can a neat thing that happened with your class at the beginning of this classes, and you were talking about people before the sun god people.
Yeah.
Me and remembering terms, no bueno. But anyway, before that, I'm listening to you teach, going, okay, whatever. Okay, whatever. And it reminded me of taking Religion 101 in college.
Ah,
And I was so unhappy. I'm like, this is icky. I don't like the it was the man was enthused, but it wasn't like an inspiring sermon kind of thing.
right,
It
right.
was studying, the book, and I'm okay. And it just gives me compassion for some Christian people in my life that keep wanting to save us by God, and how if I were to try to talk to them about
Hmm.
what's important to me, it's just going to sound like Greek and it won't inspire them, much like that religion class
Didn't inspire you, right?
it
Right.
didn't inspire you. And its history is very important to me, hearing you say it, but to them,
Yeah,
might not, none of it even,
sure,
so it just makes me more compassionate. That's all.
sure.
So,
I just recently had a person come to one of my programs, and it was actually a Bible study class that Michael and I did, and anyway, we were doing something, and after the fact, there was a person that talked to me, and who would not have expected this from, but basically said, well, all that old Jewish stuff, that's, I guess that's kind of interesting for some people, but it's all irrelevant now because, the whole Old Testament and everything since Jesus came, none of that matters anymore. And
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just, I mean, I didn't expect, I've heard that plenty from different
yeah.
people, but in this particular setting, I wouldn't have anticipated hearing that.
Oh
And
no.
it was like, oh, okay. So
Yeah, yeah.
but we all have our little blinders, and I definitely have mine too. But
What
I try to make little holes in mine at least so I can sometimes see through them.
you don't have to answer this right now, maybe another day or an email or something, but how I describe you to other people, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this in public, but anyway,
Maybe not. Go ahead.
I describe you as a first century Christian.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Does that make, maybe you've said it and I just picked it up. I don't know.
I don't think I have, but yeah, yeah, I mean, that's pretty close, I think. Yeah.
I say you believe, you practice your faith like Jesus did when Jesus was alive.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think
he, and
that's
he was
certainly my
Jewish.
intention. Whether I really
Yeah,
do that or not, it's my intention.
right, right. But he was Jewish, and that's the point. And
Yeah.
I lose people so fast with that.
Oh, I
And
know.
I get that because of the thing you just said. I'm like, wait, that's not Christianity. So yeah, the Jewish
Yeah.
thing, that's not
No, I
Christianity. Yeah.
think that's a pretty good description. I once was talking to somebody and they were asking me about my faith. And they were pretty traditional Christian, and they were asking me about my faith. But they're very respectful. And I was trying to be very respectful as well. And I said, well, what I'm teaching is probably not what you would be used to hearing in a Bible study. I'm trying to teach, like the really original early form of what became Christianity. And it's very old. And he said, "Oh yeah, my church is really old too." And I said, "Oh," and I was surprised by that. And I said, "Oh, well, what's the origin of your church?" And he said, "Oh, the one in Akron, Ohio." I was like, "Oh, okay." I was talking a little further back than that. But he's a wonderful man
Yeah.
and very
Yeah.
devout and is in
Yeah.
good faith and really a
Oh
good
yeah.
Christian in all the good senses of that word, very compassionate to people, I mean, just a good guy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I thought that was kind of a funny thing. Anyway,
But that conflict of thinking, oh, why am I learning all this Jewish stuff
yeah,
in this
yeah,
Bible class? I'm like, yuck. What is all this?
right,
So
right.
anyway, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Liz. That was fun. So Nahama, go ahead, and then we'll wrap up after you tonight.
Had to unmute. Um, I think what's really, really important for all of us to understand is that you can walk into any church or any synagogue or any mosque or any of the religious
Mhm.
establishments and be from that tradition and feel like you're in some strange place.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
Oh, good point.
you go from one synagogue to the other and it's the whatever has developed as the practices and the focus of that particular, and then you get a new leader, a new rabbi, a
Yep,
new priest,
yep,
a new minister, and sometimes that shifts. And
absolutely.
what the organization stood for or
Mhm.
institute stood for, whatever word to use, changes. And I think we need to remember that and understand that each of us brings who we are to it and our understanding of what this is and how to be compassionate, how to be caring,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, for
to
sure.
bring our sense of what God is about or what our challenge is to live as compassionate life or whatever it is, that we feel we're coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really wonderful point. And it's so true. We had I had as you know, I mean, the bulk of our exposure to Judaism has been in the kind of renewal movement arena, as opposed to say Orthodoxy or even Reform. And it's been more in that arena. And so when we did like the first time we went to an Orthodox shul in New York, and they had the little divider and men and women sat on opposite sides and stuff, which I mean, I intellectually knew that, but I didn't think about that, when I went, and it was so different than being in like the conservative synagogue here, which didn't do that, and very different than being, in like a Rabbi Cooper retreat or something. So, but yeah, and Rabbi told me a story one time. I mean, it's not unique to him. You probably heard it too, but he said one time that there was this Jewish man who'd been on a ship, and the ship had sunk, and he ended up swimming to an island and survived for a while before he was rescued. But he was the only human being on the island, and he was rescued quite a bit later. But fortunately, there was a lot of food sources and things, so he was okay. And when they rescued them, they found that he'd built a small synagogue, like just a very small version of it, and that was his synagogue where he did his practices and worshipped, and of course he didn't have Torahs or any of that, but just the prayers he remembered and all. And they asked him, I said, well, that's my synagogue. And they said, oh, that's great. And then they were getting some other things from elsewhere on the island, and they found another building that looked just like it. And they were like, well, what's this? And he said, oh, that's the synagogue I wouldn't even set foot in.
Yeah, I know that.
So we all,
And
we all have our little,
there's another story I'd like to tell very quickly.
sure,
And that
sure.
is congregation. And when people would go up on the bema where we
Mhm.
read Torah sort of thing, they do this little dip.
Oh, right, right.
And what is this about? What is this about? This guy comes, I've never seen this before.
Yeah.
And he searches out till he finds the oldest person in the congregation who can't even attend services any longer. And he says to him, can you tell us why are people dipping? Why are they bending? And he said, oh, years ago we had this Ner Tamid that hung really low. And so they were dipping to go underneath it. So we develop habits
He had to
and
duck.
traditions that we don't even know. People thought they were bowing. They were
Right.
just going under the Ner Tamid.
Yeah, that's a love. I've not heard that one. That's great.
Yeah.
Lovely. I really like. I'm gonna borrow that story. I like that one a lot.
Okay. Anyway, thank you.
Well, thanks, Helen, Julie, Uppo. Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. We're gonna wrap up. We're a little past time. I'm sorry about that, but I hope you have a blessed week and that you have a week of even better health and better prosperity and deeper connection. So thank you all for blessing us with your presence tonight. And God willing, we'll see you all next week. All right. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night night.
Night night.